you can review. But also, it's a tool. Just like your laptop's a tool, your pencil's a tool. I mean, integrity recording is a tool. And if it helps you to go back and review some things, do so. But I don't force anybody to go back and review integrity file. Again, I gotta remind myself, 2:30 to 4, roughly, philosophy department event, March 31st. We meet some of the philosophy faculty. That's this Friday. I gotta see, even though Coppin's on break, I just got so many things in here. I would kind of like to try to make this one. Now remember, the one on April 8th is actually one that you can do for extra credit. So remember, you can do up to 2 extra credits. And there's a folder in Blackboard with various options, most of which are video presentations. You view the video, it's about half an hour to 45 minutes. Write half a page to a page. It can be long. Turn it in. And I'll accept those up until the last day of class. So, and trying to decide, well, each of those is worth 10 points, but it's extra credit. It does not add anything to the denominator. So, for instance, doing one of them would be like getting an 80 rather than a 70 on this test. Now, it doesn't average out because you can't improve your average by 10 points because I don't let you do 4 or 5 of them, but it can make the difference of around 3 points if you do both of them. And you say, well, what's 3 points? Well, if you're on the borderline between, a B and a C, or, I had somebody at Compton just a week and a half ago, sorry, I had her fall semester. Wherever you make the cut, and I don't make it at 90% on the nose, I go down a bit depending on the semester, depending on where people are. But wherever you make the cut, somebody is going to just miss it, right? And she just missed it, and she got a B instead of an A. But if she'd have done just one, I give them the same chance to do two. If she'd have done just one, it would have picked her over the top, because she didn't miss it by that much, So especially if you're like in the high range on this first test, you're in a high C range or a high, B range, you want to especially think about that because it might give you just exactly what you need, to get you over the top. Okay. There are people who got C's on the midterm who technically had a D average, but usually the paper I grade a little bit more generously, so, I take that into account, giving the midterm grades and some other things, So I really, look hard at what people do on the essays, because that tends to really be a good predictor. But I don't like to give these. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that if you got a 62 average in here that I'm going to kick you up to the C. No, that's not going to happen. I can't perform miracles. But I will go farther into the D range for C's than any other category because, as most of you know, since we're a 2-year institution, you might want to get a terminal AA here and not go on anywhere. I mean, your career track might not call for that. That's fine. But if you are planning to transfer something, most, almost no one takes a D. If you're already at a 4-year school and you pull a D in something, they'll give you 3 hours credit towards graduation. But if you're trying to transfer something, normally you need C or above. So my thinking is, to give somebody a D, you may as well give them an F. So if somebody's, close, kick them over the top. And so because I can't, on the one hand, I can't give pluses. We don't have that in our grading system. Some schools do. So, somebody's got a 78.5, and I'm going to give them the same C that somebody who got a 71, barely got, Well, they look the same on the transcript, That's why, I'm inclined to kick somebody up, because I can't give somebody a C plus as a grade. Okay, enough said, I guess. Well, let's get into to the topic of evil. Note that for some of these polytheistic systems, like, we're already going. Oh, I don't want that recorded. Yeah, we'll let that. Let the tape keep rolling. A good recording engineer knows to let the tape keep rolling. Sometimes the group's going to be just doing a final run through, and it's better than the one that they wanted to do. Okay. So sometimes it's good to let them do it and not know it's being recorded. But anyway, so much for that. That was another life. The problem of evil is not a problem for the Greek gods, right? For a number of reasons. One, you say, well, don't we have Zeus, Vikings had Thor, and these were kind of, head honcho gods in their own polytheistic system? Well, yeah. The technical term the theologians use is a henotheism, and I am never going to answer that on test. But that's a term for a specific type of polytheism where there's a head god. But note, Thor, for one, or Zeus, is not claimed to be all-powerful. Yes, maybe mightier than the other gods, but not all-powerful. And also the Greek gods were not claimed to be all good. I mean, they were portrayed as having a lot of the same human failings that we have. Being jealous, vengeful, a number of things that you might interpret as immoral behavior were attributed to the Greek gods. So they weren't considered to be morally perfect. And while they seemed to know more than we did, I don't think the claim was that they were omniscient, that they know everything. Also, remember, for somebody like Plato, the world was eternal. The material world for Plato is eternal. He had a sort of impersonal god he called a demiurge, D-E-M-I-U-R-G-E, who was responsible for putting already existing forms, remember the forms are eternal, with eternal matter to make specific things, like specific desks and chairs and stuff. But the Greek gods were not claimed to create the material world ex nihilo, like you did in Genesis and theistic tradition, right? So, if the world's evil, well, I mean, Zeus didn't create it. Don't blame Zeus for it, right? And so the point is, these problems don't arise for something like a polytheistic system, but they do arise for traditional monotheism, where God is claimed to have created the world from nothing, ex nihilo, pronounced it good, where God is taken to be all-powerful, omnipotent, all-knowing, omniscient, and unlike having failings of the Greek gods, morally perfect, omnibenevolent, and merciful. And it's with that concept of God that the problem of evil arises, because if God is all-powerful, wouldn't it be and all good at the same time, and all-knowing? You can't say he didn't know that rape was going on behind that convenience store that night in the alley, because he knows everything. So it's for God as conceived that way that the problem of the traditional problem of evil arises. So Hume talks about this. It's funny, you get Hume at opposite ends of the spectrum at different points in his life. Now we think of these guys as, old guys, but Hume wrote his first book in his mid-20s, right? Not too much of people here. And it was called The Treatise of Human Nature, and a very skeptical book. And he thought he wanted to really raise some dust, he wanted to really raise a lot of controversy with that book. Hume was unapologetically skeptical. And what he wrote to a friend was that the book fell stillborn from the press. Nobody noticed it. He said, I didn't even get a rouse out of the most ardent religious zealots. Nobody paid any attention to the book. But the work from which the slide presentation is taken was written at the end of Hume's life, after he wrote what was then the greatest history of England ever, besides his works in philosophy, after he's gained an international reputation as a philosopher, made tons of money for himself. Here is Hume at the end of his life, and he writes this book called Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. And he does not want to deal with all the controversy that he knows is going to come. And so he instructs his publisher to do the opposite of what he did at the beginning of his life. He said, look, don't publish this thing until after I'm gone. Because he didn't want to deal with the negative feedback. Now, one of the things that Hume wanted to be remembered for, one of the three things that he wanted to be remembered for in his whole life, in his whole career, was the destruction of the design argument. So that's in part of this slide, at least what he thought was the destruction of the design argument. Obviously not everyone agrees. But he also discusses in that book the problem of evil. Now, most philosophy books are not written like Plato's in the form of dialogues, right? Plato is rather unique in that. But some other philosophers, for instance, Berkeley, we just had St. Patrick's Day yesterday. I was looking at the parade in Dublin, and I
commented on a paper on the 300th anniversary of Barker's birth in 1985 over in Dublin, Ireland. And, we have, well, at any rate, back. Basically, Hume, being from Scotland, is basically discussing the problem with the revolt. Oh, I was going to say Berkeley wrote a little book that we used to have undergrads read in intro at the University of Virginia. A discussion that was in dialogue. So he's an exception. And Hume wrote in dialogue form. In other words, if you look at the book, it looks like a play where there are characters. And there are three characters. Philo, who is Hume, who is the skeptical philosopher, right? Let me see a mention down. Damia. Now, I almost think that this name is suggestive. Damia, diminished, someone of small mind. Damia is the sort of very traditional, conservative, religious believer. Okay. Now, the other character who comes in later is Cleanthes, someone who wants to give human properties to God. The made-up name Cleanthes has within it the root words of anthropos, the Greek word for man or human being, and theis, the root for God or theism. And so Cleanthes is somebody who wants to give human attributes to God like mercy and benevolence, but also wants his faith to be more rational, to be based on things like the design of God. He is closer to the deists of human stuff. But at any rate, this is a very uplifting discussion. I think this one, I think I can keep the light on because you have Hume, the skeptical philosopher, and Damia then are coming at the issue of religious belief from opposite sides of the spectrum, right? Hume's the skeptic. Philo is the very devout traditional belief. Not Philo, I'm sorry. Damia is. But they both agree on the essentials of the human situation, and that is that this is a pretty miserable place. In other words, Hume and Damia are glasses half-empty kind of guys. Now we're going to see later that Cleanthes is the glasses half-full kind of guy. He looks at the bright side. So they disagree on religious beliefs, but Damia and Philo agree on the human situation. But for Damia, human misery and the fact that lots of bad stuff can happen in the world is a reason to seek to appease God, that nothing worse happens to you. Whereas for Philo, human misery is a reason to challenge God's existence. So Damia thinks that religion should be felt as well as just be a body of beliefs. Each person feels the truth of religion within his own breast. And he says, from a consciousness of his imbecility and misery, that is, of a person's imbecility and misery, not from reason, he is led to seek the protection from that being, in essence God, on whom he and all nature is dependent. Now these were pages in a philosophy text I was using at the time up in Carroll County, where we had a long reading from Hume's dialogue concerning natural religion. So, I would like to know how you kill this thing. Anyone know? I mean, I don't use it, but it seems like every time I try to do something with it, it's not good. Let me just get it out of the way. I have to call IT guys. So, Damia thinks we should try to appease God, who's able to afflict and oppress us by prayers, adoration, sacrifice, and seek for personal atonement, right? That's his response to the fact that the world has a lot of misery in it and a lot of bad things can happen to us. Try to appease God so he doesn't bring anything worse down on you. Whereas Philo says that appreciation of the misery and wickedness of mankind is the best way to give people a real sense of religion, and he also thinks it's better felt and reasoned out. But, Philo, again, wants to raise the problem of evil as a problem with God's existence. But here you get, I feel like I'm reading something from Al Gore on global warming. For Damia, the whole earth is cursed. He says, and polluted. All earthly inhabitants are in perpetual war. This point was earlier made by Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes tried to argue that the state of nature was anything but idyllic, like the Garden of Eden. That the state of nature was where there was no government, was really a state where everyone was at everyone else's throat, and nobody could rest easy. And even somebody who was big and powerful, who could overthrow people, might have a whole gang of people ganging up on him. And so Thomas Hobbes thought that one reason why we get together and establish a strong government over us is because the alternative is worse. At least we can sleep at night. Now Hobbes, unlike Locke, argued for a pretty centralized government. Locke wanted a lot of controls against government going too far overboard. So, but this view chimes in well with Hobbes' view and with the Darwinians, right? Now, of course, he's writing about 50 years before Darwin published. So the strong, even the strong, are affected by hunger and want, and the weak and the infirm are agitated constantly by fear, anxiety, and terror, and life in all stages of the life of distress. Philo, again, agrees with him. He says, look, in nature, animals prey on other animals. The strong prey on the weaker, but the weaker even prey and vex the stronger, like, stinging insects can vex even lions. And every animal is surrounded by enemies. Right, so pretty dog-eat-dog world, literally. But he says, well, men in society can master lions, tigers, and bears, sort of. We're out playing backgammon at midnight last night. The guy won the tournament. I left, and I said, give me the final results, and I'll throw them up on the website. So he gave me the results, and he said, I won the tournament, but I think my luck ran out because when I was driving home down Charles Street, a deer ran in front of me, and I hit a deer. I guess he was all right. I mean, people can get killed hitting a deer. So we've sort of mastered nature to a degree. But Philo says, look, even in society, we can master our enemies like that, wild animals. But Philo is worried that we make imaginary enemies. And here you can see his skepticism toward religion, right? He's saying, well, even if we don't have real oppressors, even if I don't have to worry that a bear is going to come knock my door down, he says, by superstition, man in society terrorizes himself with imaginary enemies, i.e. making God an enemy, right? His pleasures, meaning God's pleasures, offend him. Even his food choices might give God offense, and even death brings endless fears of a life in hell or something after death. So Hume, of course, doesn't believe that this actually is the case. Even on his deathbed, he wouldn't convert. And he also goes on that we can be our own worst enemy even in society, right? Humans bring woe and misery on other humans by oppression, injustice, violence, war, and obviously we have that today. And here again, he restates basically Hobbes' point. We dissolve society, but the state of nature is even worse. Nobody can sleep well. So you can see between them, Philo and Damia, paint a pretty negative view of the world. So, but on the other hand, Cleanthes chimes in, and he's got a much more positive view. Philo challenges Cleanthes to continue to claim human-like virtues for God, basically in the face of this kind of evil. That God is just, benevolent, merciful. There's a contemporary philosopher, I imagine he's gone by now, but he was a very famous atheist, although I understand he converted to Christianity late in life. Tony Flew, Anthony Flew, and one of his famous articles wonders if concepts like this can die the death of 1,000 qualifications and end up being almost meaningless when they're applied to God. And he gives an example like this. He says, consider, a young child dying of inoperable cancer in the throat. His earthly father is worried sick about it and loves his child and wants to do everything to try to help his child. On the other hand, Flew says his heavenly father seems to not particularly care about this. But you say, well, God loves us as a father loves his children. And Hume says, well, if he does, whatever we mean by love when we apply it to God doesn't seem to be the same thing we mean by love when we apply it to a father and a father's love for his children. In other words, what Hume means by saying a concept like the love of God, an anthropomorphic concept, can die the death of a thousand qualifications. If we say, well, is the love of God consistent with a young child dying of inoperable cancer at the throat? Well, yes, that's still love. What about genocide in Rwanda? Yeah, so love. And what he's saying is, if almost nothing you take that can happen is taken to be a contradiction to the claim that God loved us, he's saying, well, what's left of that claim? And so that's a 20th century elaboration on the point that Hume is trying to make, and H.E. flew with the Hume store about this, saying, well, in the light of all the evil in the world, what sense does it make to say things like God is benevolent and merciful, and these bad things happen? Now, I'm not saying there's no answer to this, because there's been a discussion about this for a long time, but I'm just trying to kind of give Hume's case here. So Hume says, look, God obviously can't desire our happiness because we're not happy, nor does he seem to be particularly desirous of our good, since a lot of bad things happen. Since nature itself, which is supposed to be God's creation, does not seem to work to support our happiness. So again, Philo says that what we mean by God's benevolence and mercy don't resemble the human qualities. But then you can say, well, what do we mean then, really, when we assert these qualities? So this is something that Hume is arguing against. But here's, in a nutshell, the problem, the traditional problem of Eve. Okay. And he relates back to an early statement of this problem from Epicurus. Philo says, Epicurus' old questions still go unanswered. Is he, God, unwilling to prevent evil but not able? Then God is omnipotent, is impotent, that is, not all powerful, and has constraints on his abilities. On the other hand, is he able, that is he all powerful? He could stop it, but not willing, then he is malevolent, then he's not all good. Now obviously, there is a dilemma. Two logicians talk about being on the horns of a dilemma. And what do they mean by that? Well, they mean you've got two options, two ways to go, but you're going to get gored whatever way you go, right? And if these are two horns of a dilemma that the theist has posed for him, like Hume, you're going to get gored either way, because you can't have a God that's less than all-powerful and have traditional theism, and you also can't have a God that's less than good and have traditional theism. Now, the way that these points were made by a lot of people in the 20th century is, if he's good, he's not God, and if he's God, he's not good. right? So either way, that's a real problem for theism. So that's the statement. Now, to let you see just how logical this is, the probabilistic reply, says Hume, isn't good too. Now we said Cleanthes is a glass is half full kind of guy. Right? He says, look, guys, cheer up. Talking to Philo and Hick, right? He says your melancholy views here are contrary to fact and experience. He said, look at the world. Isn't health much more common than sickness? Isn't pleasure much more common than pain? And isn't happiness much more common than misery? So he says, for every negative experience, there might be 100 enjoyments. So cheer up, guys. The world is a better place than you make it out to be. But now, here is the problem, though. When we give God infinite attributes, does this type of response really do the job? Hume says, shouldn't we expect more than that? More than the human happiness in this life exceeds its misery from a God who possesses infinite power, infinite wisdom, and infinite goodness. In other words, and the way I stated it, and I put it in a font to really nail this point, Hume's point home. But there's the drawback that it's not real readable. But it says what? Why? The real problem is why, if God is like that, is there any misery at all in the world? You know? And so that's the problem of evil. And you can see, phrased this way, it's kind of an a priori argument against the existence of God, saying that the existence of evil, would make the existence of God as God is traditionally conceived impossible. So now, a theodicy, I mean, that's not a word you and I run into every day. I had a friend in college who, after seminary, and he got his PhD in philosophy, wrote a little book on the problem of evil, wrote his own theodicy. And it actually helped him quite a bit in his career. His name was Michael Peterson. And I like to say that Michael built his career on evil. So I don't think he would describe that. But one of the more widely read responses has been by the contemporary. Well, he was contemporary in the late 20th century. I don't even know if he's still with us. But John Hick. And we're not going to look at his own theodicy, but you can look at the slides if you want, if you're curious about it, because I kind of summarized his article, the main points of his article in those slides. You can get a good idea of what he's trying to say. But a theodicy, he defines the term. The word comes from the Greek theos and dikeia, or dike meaning righteous. In other words, it's an attempt to justify God's goodness in the face of the fact of evil. So, now, here's the thing. And now we come down to Augustine and a solution to the problem of evil that Hick discusses and that Augustine rejected as not consistent with traditional Christianity. In other words, there are solutions to the problem of evil that may give you a way out, but that don't seem to be in accord with a traditional Judeo-Christian view of God. And one was the view that came from Manichaeism that Augustine rejected. But we'll get to that in a moment. That's the last of the three. He just briefly mentions this, and we're not going to dwell on it, but evil as a psychological illusion, God as a finite deity, and evil as the coordinate opposite of good. Now, this last view is basically what the Manichaeans held, that you've got good and evil in constant strife. In order to have good, you've got to have evil, or vice versa, right? But to have evil coexisting with God seems to go against the thought that God is all-powerful, omnipotent. If evil is somehow on par with him, then that doesn't seem to be consistent with the Judeo-Christian view of things. Evil is a psychological illusion. Among the people who view it this way is Christian Science, which, I'm not trying to offend anybody in Christian Science, but many people, traditional believers, don't think that this is Orthodox Christian view. Christian Scientists might disagree, but he says the Bible, if that's going to be your guide for faith, treats evil events as real events and suffering as real suffering. It's not just a psychological illusion. He says evil is not an illusion to be dismissed, but dark and menacingly ugly and opposed to God's ultimate will. If that is good, God doesn't want total evil for us. So he says, maybe we can reply the problem of evil by viewing evil as only a psychological illusion, but he says that doesn't seem to be a Judeo-Christian reply. Now, another way, would view God as a kind of kindly old grandfather who really, he knows that there's evil out there, but he's not all-powerful. He's just trying to do the best he can, so, give him a break. I mean, don't hold him responsible, for everything that's going on. Personalism is one school of fairly liberal Christianity. Gordon Parker Bound was... this was a 19th century view. I think it was based in New England. But they held this view. Portrays the deity as doing his best with a material world that's co-eternal with himself. So God doesn't create the world from nothing. The world's there, and he's got to deal with it, right? And he's trying to do the best he can. We can't blame such a deity for allowing some evil to slip through. And likewise, if Plato and Socrates were right, and the world was eternal, the material world, and we can't blame Zeus for some evil slip into it. But he says this rejects the basic premise of traditional monotheism, that God is infinite, not finite, and that God is all-powerful, and the sovereign creator of the finite material universe, not its eternal equal. Okay. Now, another view, and this seems to be view may be influenced by some Eastern concepts like the yin and the yang, which is a symbol. Any theory viewing evil as somehow coordinate with God, as on a par with God. All such views are rejected by Augustine. The material world is not inherently evil for Augustine. God created it as good. So he accepts the claim, of the first two chapters in Genesis. But what does he say? Evil is parasitic upon good. It's the going wrong with something which is in itself good. And here's where Plato comes into the picture, right? We call for Plato that at the top of the heap of forms is goodness itself, or the form of the good with a capital G. Right. So if we treat like a line for Plato, you've got goodness. That is the form of the good. Something of which all other forms aim. Right? This is the sun out there lighting the intellectual world. But it's not only, it's the standard for Plato for moral goodness and the most fully existing thing. Remember, we said for Plato, unlike for us, existence is on a whole gradation of degree. But the most fully existing thing is for him the form of the good. And for Plato, everything aims at the form of the good, but to some degree falls short of it. But, so he ties moral goodness up with existence itself. And the way people phrase this is, for Plato to be less than good is to be less than real. The material world is less than real, and it's also less than good. So this is why I think Augustine portrays evil as not just the world is good, evil doesn't exist in the world. And so you don't have the problem of, well, how could an all good God somehow create or be responsible for evil? And his reply would be, well, that question doesn't even arise because evil is not an existing thing. Because think about it, if to be less than good is to be less than real, and here I'm with most of the people who interpret Augustine in thinking that for Augustine evil is an unreality. Hick tries to defend a slightly different view. But if evil is somehow at the other end of the spectrum from the form of the good, then, and to be less than good is to be less than real, well, if this is the thing that is to the greatest degree less than good, it's also to the greatest degree less than real. So basically, evil is unreal. So it's the going wrong of something which is in itself good. And so Hick defends Augustine against critics who view his position as making evil to be unreal, is the word there. But I think evil is unreal for Augustine. Yeah. Well, okay. That is exactly the view that Augustine held in his earlier days and absolutely rejected as inconsistent with the view that God is omnipotent and infinite. How can something be co-eternal and co-equal with God, that is evil, if God is to be, omnipotent and the creator of everything? He says that's inconsistent with a Christian view. Yeah.
But we're not putting a being in perspective of evil. That's why I get confused there. God is an actual being, but evil is no perspective.
Well, I mean, that's not an irrelevant question. Because even, the old Latin thing, the devil made me do it. Well, in traditional Christianity, the devil is not viewed as co-equal with God, but as a created being who rebelled and fell, but as far less than omnipotent. And so, yeah, I see what you're saying is right. How could evil manifest itself in the world as say the intentional action of some being if there is no being around, right?
So saying God is good created evil, God is the devil, good manifested evil.
Well, that see part of the solution to why, I mean, there are two types of evil: metaphysical evil, like a flood, drowns, right, a tornado, an earthquake, and moral evil, the kind of evil that persons, human beings, are responsible for, like rape or murder. And part of the way, and Augustine had a version of this, and I think it's consistent. Part of the way you deal with that type of evil is the free will defense. In order for beings to have genuine free will, you have to give them the free will to choose evil. We had a reading in our textbook at Coppin from Augustine, where Augustine deals with the problem that you're kind of hinting at in what you said, In other words, if God gave us free will, right, and it is only by using our free will to choose to do evil and act on it that we can do evil, but God's responsible for giving us free will, then why isn't God responsible for the evil that we do? You know, and so that's a residual problem that he has, and he gets God off the hook. But go ahead before I tell you how I...
Essentially, I mean, technically, evil couldn't exist without good, because what would evil be if you didn't know what good was? The opposite, right?
Well, okay, so you like the idea of evil as somehow co-eternal.
Does God have free will?
Well, God is certainly portrayed. You know, God is portrayed as having free will, but when we talk about God being all powerful, you know, there are biblical verses that say God can't lie. It's totally against God's character to do that. And so, whatever we mean by being all powerful means that God's not going to stop being God. In other words, you know, it's no problem for God's omnipotence that you ask God to do something, you know, that entails that he stops being God to do it. You know, he also can't make a stone that's so big that you can't throw it. You know, I mean, you sort of dismiss those types of paradoxes that are supposed to show that the concept of omnipotence is wrong by saying that it's not a point against God's being all-powerful that God can't do the logically impossible, that God can't square a circle or something like that. So, and I don't know if that quite takes it, but at any rate, I mean, these are points that are raised in this discussion. But you can see that I mean, Augustine is heavily influenced by Plato, and if Plato sees goodness as being the most fully existing thing, well, if to be less than good is to be less than real, then why is it to be real? And so, in the next few slides, here's how this works out in concrete situations. And maybe we can get some input on this. For Augustine, the way it's usually, the way his view is usually characterized is that for Augustine, evil is the deprivation of good, the lack of a good. The world is good, but you can have a lack of good. So if evil now is not entirely unreal, it's incompletely real. That was the point I made against Kant. But evils are often viewed as the lack of something good. In other words, you know, we have a terrible drought in places like Texas and California, right? In an agrarian society, drought is a bad thing, right? You can't grow your crops. You can't make a living. You can't feed yourself. You can't feed your animals. So, if rain in an agrarian society is a good thing, then if a drought is looked upon as an evil that's befallen this agrarian community, well, you say, well, it's not evil as if evil's a thing, but rain is good, and and drought is simply the lack of that goodness. Now, I'm not sure what a flood is. Maybe a lack of goodness. Now, obviously, this would be very unpolitically correct today, but we're talking about Augustine's discussion. And some people would just look upon it as an evil that somebody might want, right? So you can say, well, blindness is not an evil as such, as something that exists as an evil, but it's simply the lack of sight. And sight is death. Or sickness is simply the lack of a good namely health. And suffering is the lack of a good namely peace and contentment. Now, so God alone is fully real, and evil doesn't coexist as God's counterpart. What do you think about this? I mean, you can see if evil doesn't exist, then it's consistent with the claim that God created the earth good, right? And here Augustine would obviously be parting ways with Plato. He's going to side with Genesis versus Plato's claim that the material world is evil. But I mean, if somebody's very ill and visiting them in the hospital, it's going to comfort them. You would say, you think this is a real evil that they're calling you, but it's not. It's just the lack of a good. When you were healthy, that was a good, and what's befalling you now is not an evil. It's just the lack of health. So, cheer up. Well, in other words, we have the word euphemism. What's a euphemism? It comes from the same Greek word as eudaimonia, well-being. Euthanasia, thanatos is a Greek word for death. Euthanasia literally means good death. If a euphemism is a way of stating something, they weren't in a gun battle where they were shooting each other's brains out, but they were involved in a fire. Take the edge. Attacking people, shooting people in the head in this battle. We have firefights. I've listened to what some people criticize Augustine's view as doing. Does he whitewash evil? In other words, is Augustine kind of putting something akin to political spin on the whole concept of evil? By saying, well, it's not evil, it's just lack of good. Critics say Augustine's solution whitewashes evil by trying to define it away with something akin to political spin and double talk. Whether you call them evils or absences of good, the question is why does an all-good, all-powerful God allow it? So at any rate, Augustine's solution to the problem of evil is one more comprehensive one. It has to, evil just doesn't exist. And the problem of how could God create evil? And obviously, if it doesn't exist at all, it certainly does not exist as a co-equal with God, right? But some people think Augustine's way of approaching the problem is psychologically very unsatisfying because it seems to, again, deny the reality of evil. Here in the most literal sense. So, I don't know. How does it impress you? I'm not, I still haven't, decided where I down on that. Go ahead.
It's almost subjective. I mean, good and evil only exist as society defines it. I mean, when did people start saying this is good and this is evil? When did things change just a series of things that happen? So, that's a good thing, but that's evil.
Well, okay. I mean, that's certainly one view of moral qualities that there aren't objective moral standards, but they're only what we call and I mean that certainly is a position you can take on this issue, which basically would say that not only does not evil exist, but good doesn't exist either, not in any objective way. It's only good and evil, moral good, moral evil are only how we call something. And I mean, that's the legitimate position to take. There are, a number of issues philosophers have raised with that type of subjectivism, but that is one view. And of course that's akin to the kind of view, say, the sophists would have held, whereas Augustine is trying to be a bit closer to a view that Plato would have, that there really is, that there are some objective, non-relative standards. But, well, any rate, so we have Augustine's approach to evil. I think there's a discussion also of the free will solution. We may look at that a little bit, but I also want to look at, I almost view the ontological argument and the problem of evil as being on opposite sides of the issue of the existence of God, but as being very similar, that they almost seem to be a priori, right? Completely inconsistent with the view that God has the traditional attributes of God, that evil would exist at all, right? In other words, if God is all good and benevolent, why would he want to see evil existing at all in the world? And if he's all-powerful, why doesn't he stamp it out? And you can't get him off the hook saying he didn't know it was there, because he's also omniscient, all-knowing. So the problem of evil tries to do in theism and belief in God in a kind of a priori way. That if evil exists, then it's a complete contradiction with God's existence. On the other hand, on the other side, this argument that dates back to St. Anselm tries to prove the existence of God in an a priori way. That is, with the certainty of a mathematical axiom. And of course, the question is either one of them really do the job? They're at opposite ends of the spectrum. In other words, do you do in belief in God in one fell swoop with the problem of evil? Or on the other hand, do you prove that God has to be there with the traditional attributes of God, with the ontological argument? Or are both of these extremes something that should be rejected in favor of a more probabilistic, a posteriori approach to the whole issue? I tend to think that that's the case, that both extremes. But we're going to look at the ontological argument because it's like a cat. It's had several different lives. And recently, in the last, in the 20th century, there was a new statement of it that completely raised the issue of whether it might work. So we'll look at that. I have a PowerPoint on that I'll make visible to you. So it's time to go.